Hi, I'm Elizabeth Sherman, and today I'm doing an interview with George Fearon. He is a lover of art, of gardening, of nature, and government, and he was a librarian at the Union Springs High School. And he grew up in Oklahoma, but when his wife and him were offered a job at the high school, they came to live in the area and have lived over here ever since. They live over on Route 90, just outside of Union Springs. And he talks a lot on the school, the churches in Union Springs, his time in government, and on his memories with Mrs. Cook. And he also talks about his time with the Lions Club and the Masons. He also ran a lot of different marathons, so you hear him talking about that as well. And his work with the NAACP, which I find very interesting and cool. And yeah, so enjoy my interview with George Fearon. You'll also hear Joan Parsnick with me as well, so enjoy. Can you just start off with giving a little introduction about who you are?
Okay, my name is George Fearon. I currently live at 5641 State Route 90, Cuba, New York, 13034. Okay, I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1942, and I went to school, public schools in Tulsa, Oklahoma until my senior year, and my parents were afraid that I wasn't going to be ready for college, and there was a new school opening up, and you had to take exams to even be considered, and there was about 10 applicants for each slot that was going to be open. Anyway, I did very well in exams, and I went to the first year of a Christian Brothers school, and I was actually the oldest person in the graduating class, so immediately at graduation I became the oldest alumni of the school. Anyway, and then I went on to Oklahoma State University and got my bachelor's degree. And my first degree was in history. And from there, education-wise, I got my master's degree from Emporia State University in Kansas, and that would have been in library science.
Was that where you met your wife, at Emporia State?
Okay, yeah, no. So I met my wife. She was living in a small dormitory at Oklahoma State, and they would have one day a week. They would get a record player out, play some records in their lobby, and you could like go in and you could ask a girl to dance. And I asked her to dance, and we started talking a little bit, and I found out that her father was an engineer and my father's an engineer, and so on. We had some things in common. And at some point later, we got married in 58, which would be 58 years ago now.
So you also had in common that you both had a degree in library science.
No. We both got degrees in library science. She started out as a second grade teacher, and I did not start out in the library at first, in my first employments. I taught government, and I taught geography, history, economics, and those are the kinds of things that I taught initially. Later, I got into the library science. Actually, part of the way that happened was I was in Marysville, Kansas, and as a teacher, and I would go to the library. I always loved books, and I'd go in the library, and I'd look, and I'd think, you know, maybe I might want to be a librarian instead of a classroom teacher. And that I just kind of fell for that idea, and then proceeded to get a degree in that field and become a librarian. I've never been a shy person, and when I was in public schools, I was always like one of the officers of the student council. And one thing that I really got involved in was I got involved in civil rights stuff back in the 60s. At one point in my life, I went to Florida with my older sister by train from Oklahoma to Florida, and I got whipped by my grandmother because I drank at the wrong water fountain. And that was something that I never forgot about. But in 1963, I was first joined the NAACP, which I'm still a member of, and I got involved in arranging and setting up sit-ins at restaurants that wouldn't serve people of color. And the first one that I ever did, they were painting the place and closed for 3 days. Ordinarily, they were open 24/7, and it was, I don't know what they call it, a restaurant or a cafe. They had 28 seats. I got 29 people involved in filling. When they opened the door, we filled every seat in the restaurant and had one extra person there besides that. And what we did was we said that my friend, who was from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, his name was Samuel Atnafu, we said it was his birthday and that they needed to wait on him first. He was a person of color, and they, following instructions of their employer, could never serve him. And so we just would sit there. The extra person made it so that we could go to the bathroom and get water. We were there for 3 days and 3 hours. And they served him his meal after 3 days and 3 hours. And I've always considered that one of an accomplishment that was important to me, about believing in the equality of all people as being equal and no one lesser or greater.
Yes, so it's very good.
So that's another little story. Okay, so that's kind of in the history going back. My son David was living in Hawaii, and he was going to do the most difficult marathon in the United States, which is around the caldera of Kilauea volcano. Kind of at the last minute, I decided to do the marathon also. I borrowed a pair of shoes that didn't really fit very good, and was a person who completed the marathon. I've completed every marathon I've ever tried to do. Part of why that marathon is considered quite difficult would be you're doing a marathon around the caldera of the most active volcano on Earth. everything is black. You've got elevation, so the air is thinner. The temperature is about 95 degrees and the humidity is about 95%. In the first half of the marathon, there is no trail. About every 800 feet, there's a flag which you have to watch for, but you're going over a volcanic field where you're doing hurdles over volcanic rocks, sometimes as high as chairbacks, for 13 miles.
Wow.
When you complete that, it actually levels off, and I finished that marathon. I was 55 when I did the marathon, and I was the oldest finisher. It's not a marathon that many people would think about doing. I continued doing marathons other places and so on. Over the years, I did about 15 marathons. There's certain ones I liked especially. One of them would be the North Central Trail Marathon right outside of Baltimore. It was one marathon that I did several times. Anyway, and part of that, maybe, I consider that the feat of my life. And I've never done anything comparable to it. That Hawaiian marathon. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to compare it.
Well, you know, I'm going to go back in. I considered that to be the feat of my life. The same year that I did that marathon, I did New York with over 40,000 finishers. But another thing about the marathon was, that I want to mention, was started by the U.S. Marines. And the night before you slept in a military bunk, and it's the cheapest night I've ever had in Hawaii. It only cost me $2 to stay that night.
Wow, that's good.
We're doing all right?
Yeah, we're doing good.
The price was kind of heavy of what you had to do to get that $2 a night stay.
Well, you could have been somebody that didn't make it. And the people that didn't make it, they crashed on those rocks and they're cut up and they're bleeding, they're going into shock, and they take them out in a stretcher. That's the ones that didn't make it.
Oh. That's something.
Never
Anyway.
heard of it before, so it's very interesting.
You can look it
Yes,
up.
very
You
interesting.
can look it up online. So, I'm going to tell you now about how I ended up in Union Springs. My wife was in her faculty room in Waukene, Kansas, having lunch. And a teacher in the faculty room who was looking for a job spotted 2 library positions, an elementary and secondary library positions, in a place called Union Springs, New York, which my wife wrote it down. She went back to her library after lunch and looked in World Almanac, and Union Springs was not on their map. I went, when she told me about it, I went to my library the next day and looked in Britannica and found Union Springs. And when Carol came home, I told her that it looked very interesting. So we sent our credentials and information about what we were doing in our careers and so on, like that, and our recommendations from employers and so on. The school district contacted us and asked us to come to an interview. They bought our plane tickets to fly from Kansas to New York. They picked us up at the airport. They took us out to dinner at a nice restaurant in Auburn. Harry Rossiter would be the person that took us there. They flew us over the school district, and they interviewed both of us, and they offered us both jobs. And they would also, for the night that we spent there, they put us up in Aurora Inn, and I remember especially waking up and hearing all these geese. And this was like around the first day of April or so. And it was just immediately, this was a beautiful area to me. Where we were in Kansas, it was so flat that you could see a train at night coming about 15 miles away. You would see the train approaching with its light, because you were in a place that was just about as flat as you could possibly get. And the hills and the trees and vegetation and everything, and the lakes and everything, we just had no problem moving to this area that we were very impressed with and have come to really love very much.
Yes, I love it too. So.
When I came to New York and I would go to church, I became aware of the Lions Club, and I transferred my membership from Kansas to the Lions Club. And I'd been a Lion in Kansas for 3 years before I came here. And basically, everybody that was in the Lions Club at that time, except for one, has passed away. The only living person that was in Lions Club when I first came is Tom Eldred, and he was a Lion, is not a Lion anymore, but I've been a Lion longer than anybody in that club. Anybody else with over 50 years of being a Lion in the Lions Club. So in church, a guy named Harold Axton would sit in front of me. And I got to know him quite well. And he talked to me about becoming a Mason. And I became a Mason in 1972. I became a Mason in a Masonic lodge that was in the village of Cayuga. And I've been a Mason ever since. The lodge in Cayuga was in the old school there. It doesn't exist anymore. The building does, but the Masons merged with the Mason Lodge in Union Springs. And I'm still an active member of that lodge, and have been active in it for many years. So when I moved to Union Springs, unfortunately I'd gotten rid of my dog because I didn't think I was going to be able to find a place where I'd even be able to have a dog. But I met Fred Gardner, and he told me about a house that I could rent for $150 a month that was on Great Gully Road, and that's the house that Dan McIntosh lives in now. It was a very cold place when I lived there. The windows were not very good. When the wind would blow, the curtains would push out a little bit. So in the dead of winter, we actually only heated 3 rooms of that. But after 3 years, I bought a house on Spring Street, which was being built by Bud Rice. Anyway, we moved into that house. He financed it. It cost us $28,000. The mortgage was $197.90 a month for 15 years, was what the mortgage was that he handled it, whatever the percentage rate was at that time, which was pretty low. The house had no yard. no sidewalk, not really a driveway or anything. But I put in sidewalks, added a 2-car garage, added a bathroom and another bedroom, and lived there for 17 years. And I let somebody know that I was going to be selling the house. They were interested in knowing about that before I would ever put it in real estate. And that was Cheryl Zippel. Anyway, Cheryl bought the house. Initially, I think, was for her mother, and Scott Zippel now lives in the house. So I was running for office back in 1989. And I met a lady going door to door named Bess Cook. And usually when you're going door to door, you're trying to move pretty fast because you're trying to meet a lot of people potentially that could vote for you. But
Yeah.
it took me more than 90 minutes to get out of that house. She was a very lonely woman, and I got to know her quite well. And that election changed my life in a number of ways. One of them is over near Oakwood, I met some people that had some puppies, and I ended up with one of those puppies. So we gained a dog from that election. But I did gain a friendship with Bess Cook and continued knowing her after the election. And at some point, I'd always dreamed about building a house, especially a timber frame house. And I discussed with her the possibility of buying a lot from her because she owned a considerable amount of land. Initially, her family owned the land from Yoggers Creek to the railroad track. They gradually sold off lots, mostly to Methodist ministers. And she had to really check me out and find out whether I was okay to be a neighbor. She had one neighbor she didn't care for that much, and she wanted a neighbor that would be a nice neighbor. She would go to like a town board meeting, and you could have, there was one point where David Palmer wanted to put an incinerator in the town for dead animals, could be disposed of, which a lot of people didn't like that idea. So I, at a meeting, discussed the idea about having some kinds of regulations, like whether things are zoned for residential or not, and things like lot size, setback stuff. The board was pretty much opposed to that concept initially. Eventually they did adopt things like that, but the bottom line was she would sit at a meeting and watch people try rattle me. I was supervisor of the township, and people would speak and they might not be happy with me, but I always let everybody speak, and I never got excited or treated anybody in any kind of bad way whatsoever. And she was impressed that I didn't get rattled and I kept my cool. And so then she started finding out places I would go. If I'd gone to a party, and if she found out I went to a party, and if she knew somebody that went to the party, she would check like what I do at the party. And she discovered things like that I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't use drugs, that all kinds of stuff like that. I'm super square person. And that was all okay with her. And she eventually sold me a lot with 2 acres, going from the road to the lake, 1 acre shade, 1 acre sun, on Cuba Lake. And that's how I ended up owning the land, where I then started building a house a year later.
Wow.
Wasn't the standard process?
No, I'll say not.
No.
But it's very interesting to hear about that.
Did Mrs. Cook, at that time, she lived right next door to you?
Yeah.
And how many years did she live there next door to you?
I was somebody in the school that didn't take a lot of days off. I did go 19 years before I had my first sick day. But there was one day that I took as a personal day, and that would be the day that the timber frame was being raised for my house. And one interesting thing I thought was that the superintendent of schools, who wanted to see that, also sat with me and watched the house be erected. But as once I got living there, we were doing a lot of things for Bess Cook. One thing, I would get her mail from across the street every day, rather than her trying to walk across the street, because she really was semi-handicapped to even walk very much across a road. We would bring her food from our garden. I would get her newspaper to her, my newspaper to her every day after we looked it over. And when she passed away, because she never threw anything out. So we knew who had gone to her husband's funeral. And we knew different music that was played. And my wife, who plays the organ and the piano and the guitar and so on, we actually set up the funeral ourselves. And we made sure that people were invited that were close to her, and that helped us know some of the people that we would want on that list. And we set up a program for it and the whole thing. So I want to tell you a little bit about the history of the house after her passing. I was aware, through my connections with government, that the state of New York wanted to acquire the property, being that she had no will, or no apparent heir, and they would have been able to take the property after, I think it was 15 years maybe, would be the number of years that they would then be able to take the property. Anyway, they wanted to take the house down and put in a parking lot for ice fishing. This would have been parks. I'm trying to think of it.
Environmental.
Anyway, a fish access site ice fish access site for Cuba Lake was the concept. Anyway, because Bess Cook never threw anything out, we knew, and we could look at letters and obituaries and stuff, and my wife and I, 2 years in a row, went down to North Carolina, where she had come from, and we researched in the archives in Raleigh, sometimes from the time they'd open till the morning, till evening when they tell us they're closing and they had to leave. We also did different county courthouses. And ultimately, we did come up with a number of facts, and we boiled it down to every person that she was related to, and found one first cousin who was alive, living on welfare next door to the sheriff, in Stumpy Grove, North Carolina. And with the work that we did, she got the sale of the house, which Sean Murphy had looked the property over and felt that the property was worth $30,000 if you tore the house down and planted grass there, or $20,000 if the house was standing, because the house was considered a negative value. It was in terrible shape, the porches were falling off, so on. So anyway, we bought the property for $20,000. And in time, we owned the house for 5 months. Some people that were interested in architecture had kind of eyed the house and contacted me and ended up buying the property, and that would be Andy Cassis and Terry Dewis, who later opened a restaurant south of Aurora. They spent $1 million restoring the house, and also spent a fortune furnishing the house, because the house is furnished with furniture and paintings and everything that goes back to the original time of the house, about 1830. But if we had not gone to North Carolina and done that research, the house would not be there, and I would have a parking lot as a neighbor instead, which would not be near as desirable as having the beautiful house that's there now.
Yeah, a parking lot you can't talk to.
Well, a parking lot would be used for
Well, yeah.
a lot of other things in the dark that
Yeah.
we're not going to talk about.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit of the history of the house.
How about Cook Forest? Anything about how that was that part of her property?
Oh. Okay, we're going to talk about the Cook Forest. The Cook Forest was donated by the Cooks in memory of his father in 1941. And the school was asked to plant trees there, a certain number of acres of trees per year, until it became a forest, because before that it was a cow pasture, and there was actually a barn right across from my driveway. There was a barn there many years ago. Anyway, gradually those trees did get planted. But in the original agreement of the Cook Forest, if the school wanted to walk away from the deal, or wanted to not have anything to do with it, if they wanted to walk from the forest, they had to give it back to Best Cook. And the bottom line was, when we acquired the property from Best Cook, we acquired those reversionary rights. So if the school desired to walk away from it, they would have to give the forest to me. And I don't want the forest, and I am pressing the Nature Conservancy to do some work and get it set up where the right that I have is transferred to the Nature Conservancy, so that that land would be preserved as a forest and not developed or anything in the future. I'm a mortal person. The Nature Conservancy can be here long past any of our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a good plan. It's not been accomplished yet.
I remember going to Cook Forest for our science projects
Yeah.
and different things like that.
Yeah, and there was a
So-
bridle trail there at one time,
Mhm.
and a road trail for blind people could go through it and
Yeah.
feel stuff in there. And
Mm.
braille things. Martha Shaw set that up over the years.
So it's good you're trying to protect it. I know I'd be sad if it was to ever.
Well, and off the record, but I've been involved in a number of preservation things.
Yeah.
Besides that.
Yeah.
And actually, I need to go to one of them. Because I'm going to go to the train station.
Oh, good.
So when I came to town, Earl Fox, soon after I moved into the village, asked me to be on the zoning board of appeals. A few years later, there was a vacancy on the village board, and really it wasn't any real competition to get on the village board, but there were 2 new board members that were elected. One of them was Shirley Griffin and the other was myself. Our first meeting would have been in April 1, is when their new year, election year starts, or when you take office. So at the meeting before we were members, they had put out bids to have the railroad station demolished. I did not feel that was a wise move, and Shirley Griffin supported my concept of where I was going to go. I wanted us to have an advisory referendum and see what the people thought before we tore that down. So one board member who really wanted to tear it down but still went along with the idea of the advisory referendum, let the people speak, went along with that idea. And it was my first time in political life to go door to door, and I went to virtually every house in the village and talked to people about the station. My son was taking an architectural course under Brad Curcio. He made a model of the station, and we put the model of the station up in the hardware store that used to be run by Mort Kahn and Eddie Tanner. And so people could look at what the station might look like restored. Anyway, when the vote came in, the vote on the station came in at a ratio of keep 11-1. And we proceeded from there to start restoring the station. I got a hold of different judges in the area, and if somebody needed to do some public service and they were a carpenter or a plumber or an electrician, we got some of the work done that way to restore that station. And in time, we got the project done, and the village's offices are there now, and it's, I think, a much better outcome than what could have been.
Yes.
Thank you. So that's another story. I got lots of stories.
Yeah, lots of stories.
That's
all
yeah.
very good story.
Yeah. So when I first came to Union Springs, we had a school, elementary school in Cuba and Union Springs, and high school, middle school. Maybe the high school was mostly just high school at that time. And in time, the Cuba school closed, and the population of students was decreasing. When I first came here, the younger population was greater, and our population in the schools was basically dropped about half of what it was back then. But part of that related to the size that people had, their families. I mean, we had families like the Gaffneys where you had 12 children, and a lot of other families that had more children than they have now. So part of less is people having less kids in the first place. And another part of it might be that some of the people that move here come here for retirement, especially waterfront, and maybe their kids are already out of school in the first place. So that could relate to that. But while our population was pretty much static in the area, total population, in the nation, in my lifetime, we've gone from 131 million people to 333 million people. So the fact that our population was fairly neutral as a whole is not typical of the nation as a whole. Our population is about the same, but the demographics of our ages and stuff has changed more than anything else. But so you had graduation classes of 130 people going back in time, and that's just not something that happens anymore. And when I did retire from the school, some of the people in the class, senior class, must have thought I was okay because they did have me be their commencement speaker. And I used Christopher Columbus as a key part of my commencement speech. Basically, I talked about all his failures he had and how no matter what he ever did, he never quit trying. And my message to them in that commencement speech basically was to just do it, do it, do it, try, 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 and you will succeed.
Very good lesson.
When I first came to Union Springs, there were 4 churches in the village that were active. One was a Seventh-day Adventist church. The other 3 were Presbyterian, now in the museum, what's the museum, Methodist in what's now Trinity United Church of Christ, and Episcopal in what's now the Catholic Church. And the Catholics at that time, before they moved into the church they're in now, they were where the Legion is now. So the church thing, I looked at as a problem from square one. Different people from different denominations would tell me I needed to join and be one of these 3. I had a background of Episcopal. I had been a Methodist, and when I was a kid, my family was Presbyterian. And I went to Sunday school regularly, and I got like a pin for perfect attendance for 1 year, and then I got bars, and I had 7 years of perfect attendance in Sunday school in a Presbyterian church. But there was a point where my mother became a convert to the Catholic Church, and my parents had what I refer to as a religious war. We had to go to church with each one of them every Sunday, and my dad started taking us to the Episcopal Church, and my mother would take us to the Catholic Church. Eventually that all ended, and they both became Catholic. And so I had a background in all of these denominations. So the church had, since 1967 or 8, created a united council. They still had the 3 churches, but they had a common council, and then each church had its own board. So you had 4 different boards, which were hard to staff in the first place. And the other thing was, every 4 months they would move to a different church. They definitely stayed out of the, what's now the museum, being the hardest one to heat in the wintertime. At one point they were moving an organ from church to church. Anyway, I was extremely active in that church. I taught Sunday school to teenagers. Episcopal people treated you like you were a member if you attended regularly, whether you ever joined them or not. And I became their treasurer at some point in time, and actually eventually became treasurer for the Methodist also. So I refused to ever join one of the three, and I kept trying to drive a concept of something being different. I eventually became the president of the church council. This was in 1993. And the thing I tried to drive was that everybody had to walk away from whatever they were so we could all become something where we're all one, rather than being this divisive arrangement, which really wasn't practical in the first place. After 22 years, my idea prevailed. They voted to become United Church of Christ. It eliminated all these extra boards. We sold, the Presbyterian Church was sold for $1. The Catholic Church was sold by the Episcopal, and the church remains in what was the Methodist Church now. And if they had continued where they were, I don't see how it would even exist. You couldn't virtually man all those boards and everything, and the moving around, and so it just wasn't practical at all. There was down by the real estate agency down there that Matt and the real estate. Kraus. The Kraus's real estate business. Just south of that was a church that had at one time been a Baptist church, and that had since been torn down. And actually, when I first came to town, the remnants of the old Methodist church were still behind the church. That did get torn down. I bought a piece of land on a tax sale and donated it to the church, and started with the Lions helping, having chicken barbecues where I would sell chicken on the street, mostly in front of the bank, and I would just sit and sell until I sold the last chicken, whether I was there till 6 o'clock at night or whatever. But my first object was I raised money to put a fence around the land that I donated. And we got the fence up, and then after that I raised money to buy playground equipment because we had a child center in the church, which had originally been in the Presbyterian Church, but that had gotten moved over there. So anyway, we got playground equipment through chicken barbecue. So the original chicken barbecues were only held once a year, and they were held by the Methodist women in the basement in the dining room. But the concept of having chicken barbecues on the street was a new concept. George Spear built the shelter that they cooked the chicken over, and it became a Lion event that is done every year now, and the Lions Club raises money for all kinds of community organizations, and usually at least $21,000 a year they raise for community organizations by doing their chicken barbecues that we now do under a tent and so on in front of the church. But I was really the person that kind of helped move in the direction of the chicken barbecues as they are now. There were other people involved too that made that happen. But I feel that's one of the really nice things about our community. And obviously, and some people may know or may not know, but I've been a vegan for more than 30 years, so I don't eat the chicken, but I do help. I sell the chicken, and I tell everybody it's made with the Cornell formula. I used to, in the beginning when we were doing some of those, I would go around in a fire vehicle that had a loudspeaker, and we'd pull up in front of the old bar that's where the gas station is now, the Indian gas station, and right in front of it, and I would go, "Bop, bop, 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 bop," and then tell them, you know, to go down and buy our chicken and whatever, and we'd go up and down the streets, and I'd make my pop, 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 pop. And even still, when they're having a chicken barbecue, if it's a little slow, I get out on the street and I point at cars, and then I point at the chicken barbecue, and sometimes I think that helps bring the people in, and many people driving by know me. I'm known by many people, and so on. And I get out on the street and try to draw the people in to finish up our chickens, because we want to go home and they want to put the tent up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. The chicken's always very good. I've gotten it a few times.
I want to mention just a little bit about government. I ran for public office different times, beginning with the village and the town and the county. And I ran a total of 15 times for public office, winning each election over the period of years that I served in public office. I eventually, at one point, became the CEO of the county. Before they had an administrator, I'm the last person that held public office that was responsible for a $140 million budget. And fortunately, I'm fairly capable of working on a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheets and so on, and doing budget stuff. The last budget that was done by a non-professional, when the audit came out a year and a half later, my projections for expenditures and revenues were not more than about 1% off of the real number from my projections, and that's the closest audit I've known them to have had to being right on the numbers. Done.
Thank you very much.
I told you a lot of stories, didn't I?
Yes.
And
it was very interesting and enjoyable listening to all of them.
Tales.
So, thank you.
Tales from Union Springs.
Tales from Union Springs.
Yes.